Hey folks, and welcome to They Might Be Racing. Today we are working on a 1998 Buick Park Avenue, and I think officially October is now the brake month. This particular car, the pads are all worn down. Rotors are okay. We've already checked the rotors, so we're not going to pull those off, but it does need new pads. So what we're going to do today is pop off the caliper, pop out the old pads, check everything over, make sure it's all good, and pop in the new ones. Now, this particular caliper is held on the front here. These are the front brakes, if I forgot to mention it, by two 15mm bolts on the front. Let me just adjust the camera slightly. There we go. Depending on the age of your Buick, there was a switch over from SAE to metric at some point in this time period, so if it's a little bit earlier, you might be finding that they're, I don't know, 9/16 or 1/2. These tend to be on pretty hard. So you bust the top one loose, and then we'll go ahead and bust the bottom one loose. Again, we're using a little torque amplification. This is why I hate brakes that have been on for too long. And this is why, when you're working on your car, you should always tighten things up to the correct torque setting and not be a dimwit at Walmart or wherever you are who uses an air ratchet. Tightens the crap out of everything. Alright, I'm going to pause for a moment and get some more serious assistance. Yeah, so I had to go for a little bit more serious torque amplification in terms of a pipe and a socket wrench. So now you've got your two busted loose. Go ahead and undo them. This is one of those, this is the thread that never ends type bolts. On the plus side, these are the types that are kind of self-centering, which means putting this all back together again is going to be much easier than a car that isn't done that way. Okay, so we've got those two guys pulled out. So the next thing we need to do is prise the caliper off the rotor. Just get in there and there. Pull it out and kind of up. And these ones don't tend to want to let go. It's in part because the rotor moves around a lot while you're trying to get the caliper free. So, as you're prying at it, just be aware of the piston in the back. You don't want to hit any of the rubber around it. Now, you never want to let a caliper hang, so our trick here is to set it on a bucket where you can use it as a work table. So the two pads sit in here in these retainers. These are spring clips, so if you bought some, depending on the brand that you buy, you'll get new ones of these. You can see that both of these pads, based on the wear lines, are basically at end of life. This is the perfect time to replace them. And you can't get much more out of it without damaging your rotor. If we were actually going to be replacing the rotors on this, there are two bolts further back which are also 15s. You undo those two, the brake pad mount comes off, and then you simply slide the rotor out and then slide the new rotor in. So, but since these rotors are just fine, we're just going to put new pads in. Now these pads have a little squeaker on one side that goes on the inner, and the inner one is the trickiest one to fit because it's the hardest one to see. So once you got that one in, go ahead and fit the externally facing one. Press them down. And at this point in time, your new pads are in. Before you put your caliper back on, you need to compress the piston. What we've already done on this car is we've loosened the cover of the brake master cylinder up under the hood. We've done that so that the brake pressure has somewhere to go. What we're going to do is take our big C-clamp and one of our used pads, slide the C-clamp over the caliper, insert the pad in there to protect the piston. From here we simply tighten up the clamp, and then what you want to do is watch the piston as it goes down back into the caliper. This is also a good time for you to check the rubber on the piston, make sure the seals are still good, that there's no leaks on the caliper, because basically if your caliper fails, your brakes fail. Of course, it tends to also last a lot longer than your rotors and your pads, but you always want to check. Once you've got it all the way compressed down, back off your clamp. It's now time to fit the caliper back over the pads. You should have plenty of clearance to do so now.
Good, good.
Now there are two little rubber
Where are you at?
bolt things that go in there, so to make sure those are set correctly.
Yeah.
Go ahead and wiggle that in and start threading in the top of the caliper first.
Okay.
Once you've got that in place,
Alright, so that's 2155 south 55.
and go ahead and
Okay.
thread the lower one. Take your wrench. We're going to tighten everything up. At this stage, you're basically done replacing the pads, and if you'd already replaced the rotor as well. The other thing to mention is that when we started this, what we did ahead of filming is we jacked the car up, or we loosen the lug nuts, jack the car up, put jack stands underneath, left a supplemental jack in place. Once the car was in the air, we finished removing the lug nuts and taking the wheels off. And so what we're going to do after this is basically set the wheels back on, tighten the lug nuts up, put the car back on the ground, and we should be good to go. Before you take off, before you start driving, sit in your car, pump the brakes a few times, and make sure the pressure's back up before you go driving off. Otherwise, you'll get halfway down your street and you would have no brakes. But at this point, we're all done, so we're going to just tidy up here, and we will see you next time.